Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly office hours here at Chatfuel. My name is Andrew, and obviously you've probably heard my voice before here on YouTube, but today we're really excited to have a very special guest talking to us about mastering your brand voice on Messenger, how to write copy in your bot that is compelling and copy that converts. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Leana, who's on our user happiness team here at Chatfuel, and she'll explain who that special guest is.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is cozy with their cup of coffee or tea or something a little harder. We don't judge. It's like the quarantine time. That's perfectly fine. If you're here and you're watching, feel free to pop in the chat. Let us know what you're drinking right now, just so we know what kind of an audience is like out there. We can adjust our content. Yep. So what we're talking about today has me like very, very excited for one very good reason, and that is that I often see a lot of business owners, especially small and medium businesses, struggling with this and saying, you know, brand is this untangible, abstract thing that we don't have the time to do right now, that we don't have the resources to do right now. And now is not the right moment to invest in that. But what we're going to talk about tonight, our two guests are going to show you that brand is actually a very, very specific, tangible thing that you can have even if you don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to spend on your marketing budget. And that with little attention to detail and with a little bit of planning ahead, you can really nail and you can really like be great at it, and it can make you stand out. First, we'll hear from Leana, who goes by Verbal Identity Guru. I have to say it's my first time talking to someone who's a verbal identity guru, but it wasn't scary. Believe me, everything's gonna be fine. Yes, as Andrew mentioned, she will tell us more about what a brand voice is, what goes into creating it, what goes into maintaining it, and she's going to give you very specific tips on how you can go and apply that to your business today, like no matter how many resources you have. And after that, we'll briefly focus on Messenger, and you will hear from Angela from the Chatfuel team, and I'm sure you know her if you've been on our blog even once. You've probably seen her name. But let's first focus on Leana and on the brand voice as a general term. I'm actually really looking forward to hearing you speak today because what stands out about you, for me at least, is that you're this very structured and precise person in everything that you do when it comes to, you know, branding and marketing. But at the same time, what you stand for, what you believe in, and what you actually live is that communication doesn't need to be boring and dry for it to be right. And that goes even if it's like a huge corporate brand that has like a name to maintain and stuff like that. So I don't want to make this a huge introduction. I would love to hear from you. You can tell us, you know, a bit about yourself if there's something I missed. And you can go straight ahead into your agenda.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who joined today. I will just build a little bit on what Leana already said, which is that I do believe in a life mantra that we need to make sure that corporate writing or any type of writing doesn't have to be soul sucking and dry. It can be interesting, it can be fun, and it can be engaging, regardless if we're talking about emails or we're talking about brand tone of voice, right? This actually, for me, pertains to any type of communication. So yes, I hope you have your cups of coffee ready. I do. There's only one rule I go by every time I talk about any topic related to writing, is that I love to have interactions. This is not really about me lecturing or me giving you some boring tips. This is about, you know, asking questions, getting some answers. So please don't be shy. Feel free to pop your questions or any comments you have in the chat box. So if we are okay to kick off, I will gladly do that.
Yes, please take the stage.
Yes, please let me know. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see a beautiful llama.
Yes, beautiful llama. Fantastic. Okay.
Or an alpaca. We did not agree on that.
Yes, we're going to let that one to your imagination. Okay. You get to pick. But so today, as you know, we're going to talk about brand tone of voice, and I'm going to jump straight into it and tell you a little bit more. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about brand tone of voice, what it really is, the 4 dimensions when it comes to brand tone of voice, how to define your own, because I really want to give you some practical tips that you can apply today, and you can really start going at your tone of voice and making it live, making it interesting. I want to talk a little bit about brands that for me stand out, and I definitely want to hear your input. Tiny little bit about chatbots. I know that's going to be the topic right after mine, but I just want to give you a little soft introduction about that, some key takeaways, and then also we're going to have a Q&A session. Feel free, if you have any questions during the session, you don't have to wait till the end to ask. So just pop a question and I'll try to answer the best I can. So if you're ready, if you have your notebook and coffee and enthusiasm ready, we can kick off. So the first question I had what is brand tone of voice? So you guys are welcome to use the chatbot and just tell us what for you is a definition. What do you think brand tone of voice is? So I'll give you a second. Just to write, it can be one word, it can be 2-3 words that associate you with brand tone of voice, but feel free to type them in chat box. I would love to hear your guys' opinions and how you actually look at it. What do you think about it?
For me, that's when I know which brand posted this, even if I don't see like the brand logo. And I know.
Yes, very good. I think you're really hitting the nail on the head there, because what it really is, it's about how you interact with your customers, right? How you interact with people. But really, ultimately, we are talking about how are you making people feel when they read your copy, when they read your messaging. And what Leana just mentioned here is that it's not only how you feel, but also how memorable you are. Can people really know what brand it is the moment they read some copy? So with that being said, it's really all about the first impressions. You have one chance to get it right. So you have to make sure that you do, okay? And what's really important here is that if you get that first impression right, you are on a path of creating this relatable, trustworthy, and lasting relationship with your audience. And if you do that, whatever product you're selling, whatever services you're selling, you will be able to connect with them and they will come back for more. So let's actually jump straight into it. Let's talk about 4 dimensions when it comes to brand tone of voice. So when we talk about 4 dimensions, we talk about humor, we talk about how formal your tone of voice is, we talk about respectfulness, and we also talk about enthusiasm. But what does this really mean in practical sense? So when you look at this scale, right, it's always created on the scale, and I'll cover one by one, okay? So when we talk about humor, you can decide if your brand is going to be focused on being funny, or is it going to be focused on being serious, or somewhere in between. When we talk about your tone of voice being funny, that's something that really stands out, right? When you can read a copy and you have this smile on your face, you're like, oh, I like that. That makes your brand stand out. But you have to be quite careful here, because sometimes when people are trying to be too funny, they can really cross that line and it backfires and just looks like you're really trying too hard. But at the same time, if you're talking about being too serious, that maybe that's something that just blends in with the rest of the people, and it's, it just doesn't really make you stand out. Now let's talk about formality as the second part. On this scale, you can be very formal, you can be very casual. And when we talk about formal, we talk about this feeling of authority, right? Somebody really being serious about their business. But when you talk about casual, it's about being friendly. You also have to be careful here, because if you're too casual, sometimes people can take you as not being professional, or not have enough experience in what you're talking about. The third part that we have to focus on is respectfulness. So you can be very respectful, right? Or you can be very irreverent. And I'm just talking in this case really about the extremes. I'll talk a little bit later about where you can fall on this scale. When we talk about being irreverent, that can be really cool, right? You can come off as quite confident, you kind of know your stuff. But if you're being too irreverent, you can come off quite offensive to your reader. So you have to be careful again. Here it's all about that fine line that you're walking and hoping that you get it right. And then last but not the least is about enthusiasm, right? So if you talk about being enthusiastic, you're talking about being really friendly. But as I said, if you're being too enthusiastic, you can be very irritating to the people who are reading it. Or if you're talking about matter of fact, you can be very professional, but at the same time, sometimes people can say, well, you know, there's lacking personality. So when you look at this scale, usually people focus on 5 points. So if you can see my screen, maybe you'll fall right in the middle, right? You'll be neutral, or be maybe leaning more towards being funny and casual, but you don't have to go to one extreme or the other, okay? So it's really about finding that right and perfect point for you where you will fall into, okay? So if this makes sense, if you're okay, I'm gonna go to the next slide. So
Leana,
let's look at, yes,
one
please go
quick
ahead.
question there actually on the last slide. So would you say, you know, obviously it's going to differ depending on the brand and the organization, but would you say, you know, it's better to lean to one side of the scale or the other rather than just like kind of fitting in the middle? Because, you know, with marketing, you typically think like, hey, if I, you know, stand out, then that's better. So just wondered if you had any kind of best practices there, or it really just depends. So there's really no, you know, general guiding principle.
I think there's one general principle here, is that when you talk about these 4 dimensions, you can pick to maybe, let's say we're talking about humor, you can be neutral, right? But if you talk about formality, you can lean more on a casual side, right? So you get to pick where you're going to fall into each of the dimensions. And I think it's, if you're not really sure you have your humor right, I think it's always better to be more neutral than to push on a funny side and you're really coming off on, you know, a wrong foot there. But at the same time, you have to be very careful how you're defining it. And I think it's very important to be very specific on these things. And sometimes you're going to have at least one out of these 4 dimensions being neutral, and that's fine as long as other ones are fitting right with your brand tone of voice. Okay, so I hope that answered the question. So let's see this practically, how this looks. So I just gave you 2 extremes just to kind of make it very obvious for you. So as I said, most of the brands are not going to be super serious, formal, respectful, matter of fact, right? They're going to be maybe neutral when it comes to formality, but they're going to be more on the funny side, right? So it just, you have to be, you know, have to analyze every brand to see where they fall. But as I said, I just gave you 2 extremes to kind of see with some examples. So I want to show you 2 sentences that are written completely different way, depending if they're falling on a serious, formal, respectful, matter of fact side, or if they're being on a casual, irreverent, and funny side. Okay, so let's look at the left side. So if you're being serious and formal, you say, we apologize, but we're experiencing a problem. I'm pretty sure you heard this sentence plenty of times, you read it, and it just sounds so robotic, right? But then if you want to transfer this sentence to something super funny and casual, you would say, what did you do? You broke it. Just kidding. We're experiencing a problem on our end, right? So this is a little fun way to say it. You're making it casual. You're not making a big deal out of it, right? But you're also making it, letting them know that something is happening and something is not working. So let's look at a second example. I believe second example was from a security company that's selling security for houses, right? Security alarms and systems. So if you look on the left side, it says, make home feel safe again. We're passionate about protecting your world, right? Sounds quite generic, a bit more corporate there. But then if you want to make this a bit fun and casual, enthusiastic, it says, this sign in front of your yard tells criminals, don't even think about it, right? So they're sending the same exact message, but they're saying it completely different. So as you can see here, it just shows you the 2 parts of this scale. So let's talk a little bit about what really comes into tone of voice components and what do I really mean by that. So we're going to analyze it here one by one. Syntax, what I mean by it, basically everything that falls into part of the sentence. It can be verbs, it can be adjectives, it can be pronouns, it can be adverbs, anything you can think of, right? You need to be able to analyze each one of these parts and have a specific way of doing it when it comes to your tone of voice. Let's talk about punctuation. This is quite interesting one. You've probably seen some of these messages that have 3 or 5 exclamation marks, right? That makes me feel like they're yelling at me, right? So too much punctuation can come off in a wrong way, but then also you don't want to have only periods always, because it shows that you're not really being enthusiastic, right? Of course, it depends on your tone of voice and what you're doing, but I'm just explaining what it means in practical sense. Let's talk about style. Style is something quite broad. Here you can talk about slang, you can talk about humor, you can at this point talk about emojis or GIFs or memes, right? Because that's, you know, with this age and time, it changed a little bit from maybe 10 years ago. And we talk about personalization. This one is a quite interesting one. It can be maybe, hello, dear reader, or good afternoon, dear reader, or hey, Mark, how are you doing today, right? So how personal are you with your brand and with your customers? So let's talk about something that for me is quite important. When it comes about tone of voice, it's really going beyond all these parts of the sentence, right? It's about creating these stories, right? And it's about having storytelling part in the component of your tone of voice. Why? Because people connect with stories. They bring some memories back. They open up their imagination, and they really connect on a personal level when they hear stories, regardless if they happen to them or they happen to somebody else. So really, when it comes to tone of voice, it's not just getting it right, or I'm using right adverbs or adjectives. It's about creating a full picture for your reader or your customer. So let's talk about some practical stuff here, and that is how to define your tone of voice. Of course, this is going to differ from one brand to another, but these are just some general guidelines that you can apply. So first things first, brand values. When I talk about tone of voice, it really cannot be just a separate entity. It's so connected with branding, with everything that's a part of it, the values, the culture, the personality. So you really have to get all these components right to get your tone of voice right. But when it comes to talking about brand values, what it really is, it's what makes you unique, right? What is it that you are standing for? You need to be able to define these things very specifically, because this is something that your customers will relate to. You can think about any big brands, right? You can think about Nike, you can think about McDonald's, you can think about Chick-fil-A, if anybody living in the south of US, that's quite a popular one. And all of these brands have values they believe in. And that's one of the reasons why people buy their products and why people use their services, right? So this is going to be connected to your target audience, which I'm going to talk about in just a few seconds. So really, that's basically when it comes to brand values. Let's talk about brand personality. So if we talk about values is what you say, personality is how are you going to say it? You have to be able to describe your personality in 3 words: friendly, approachable, enthusiastic, right? Or maybe more formal or more serious but casual, right? You can still be serious but casual. It doesn't have to exclude one or the other. But what's interesting here is that you have to be able to define your brand personality in, let's just say, 3 words. And that's what's also going to guide the rest of the stuff. And what's really interesting here is that if you define your brand personality right, your customer is going to have this moment of, ooh, I like it. Ooh, I know it. And yes, I trust it, right? And it's going to be the other way around. You're going to show that you like them, you know what they're looking for, and that you're trusting they're going to believe in your product. So it's really a 2-way relationship. Now, let's talk about target audience. This is one of my favorite ones. Why? Because you really, really, really need to know your target audience. You really have to know who you are talking to. And you have to be so specific when it comes to this. So when it comes to your target audience, you have to know, if you can do this, this would be ideal. You would create your ideal customer. What's their name? Where do they live? What are their hobbies? What's their favorite food? Their favorite movie, right? What kind of brands they like? When do they buy their products? You have to be so specific, because if you know your target audience well, you're going to have to adjust your tone of voice with that. Think about it. If you are, let's just say, selling life insurance to people who are above 70, most likely you're not going to be using a lot of slang, right? But also if you're selling, I don't know, teenage clothes, you're not going to be using some old-fashioned terms that nobody knows. So you really have to adjust, know your target audience, and with that being said, adjust your tone of voice. And last but not the least is the competitors. Why? There's so many people in the market trying to do similar or the same thing you are doing. This means that you're competing against a lot of people, a lot of brands. It's a very dense market. And you really have to have this point of differentiation that people really want to buy your product. So my best advice here is to really analyze your market, see what people are doing, get familiar with what's really working and what's not. If you think about sports apparel, right? Most people think of Nike. Yes, Under Armour sells it, Adidas sells it, Puma sells it, but it's not necessarily immediately the brand you think of. So although they're all doing great things, Nike is having this edge that other brands are not. I'm just giving an example here. But it's really about analyzing your competitors and understanding how to be different. And definitely my advice here is that if something is working for one brand, never try to copy it, because it's working for them. Doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Okay, so I hope you guys are still following. I'm not going too fast.
No. One quick thing on the previous slide. I was just trying
Yes.
to, make connections of what you're presenting to Chatfuel. And I think when you're talking about, personality and personalization, one of the features we have is user attributes, which is just a fancy way of saying, different little pieces of data that you collect about your users. And so to that point, using attributes to really personalize your conversation with the person's, favorite food, color, age, all of these things can really, work with brand voice to drive engagement and conversions.
Yes, definitely. Is that the best? If you know your customer the best, you're going to be able to deliver the best to them. So I think it's really about knowing as much as you can about them. Fantastic. So one more thing for me, it was about style, right? So do you want to be funny? Do you want to be serious? Do you want to be irreverent? What is really your style? I always recommend this. Let's just say your brand has a mascot, right? I work with certain brands that had a mascot. Instead of using emojis, maybe you can turn your mascot into a GIF, or into a little mascot you can send with your text messages or in an email, right? So really personalize this and connect everything that you can. But it's really up to you how you want to sound and what you want to look like, really, in the eye of the reader. So with all of that being said, what's next? So you got it all right? You defined your brand values. You analyze the market, you know who your ideal customer is, and you're like, well, yeah, I know how I want to sound, right? I have a perfect idea. I want to be funny and approachable, but also, respectful in certain sense, and sometimes being a matter of fact when it comes to certain things. So I kind of have a general idea. I feel like I should start writing. I should start writing my messages. Big no, don't do that before you have created a style guide. I think style guide is very, very important for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think it's important that when you create a style guide, it's very detailed, because when it comes to writing messages, you're going to have different people writing messages. You can think about salespeople, you can think about people who are doing social media, right? So, and all these people might have a different idea and a concept of what funny is or what irreverent is. So you really have to be able to create a detailed style guide that's going to work for everybody. So even though maybe I want to write a sales copy, I can, because I know exactly what you're looking for, right? Especially because when it comes to like bigger brands, you're going to work with more people, and people are going to swap, people are going to come and people are going to go. You don't want to have inconsistent messaging. Also, really being consistent when it comes to writing the style guide, but also applying it. I think that's very, very important. And the last but not the least is really about the constantly revisiting your style guide for two very simple reasons. Market can change, so you have to follow the change that's happening. But also maybe you will change as a brand. You will change maybe your mission, your purpose, you'll go in a different direction, and you want to make sure that your style guide is following those changes. So let's look in a practical sense. What should you include when you talk about a style guide? I already mentioned a little bit about this earlier, but I'll try to go a little bit more into detail here. So syntax, right? What kind of adjectives you should be using? What kind of verbs you should be using? Should you be using cliches, or should you stay away from it, right? Should you use things that everybody's using, or should you try to be different? Talk about symbolic language. I think here I really refer to like emojis, GIFs, and stuff like that. You have to see if this works for your brand. If you're being funny, but you're using some puns and references that other people get, you might not need to use emojis, right? If you're sending messages or blog posts for people who are 60 plus, emojis might not be the best way you want to approach it. But maybe your target audience is somebody who is, super young, and they want to really, they use it all the time. So really have to be careful about these things. Slang and jargon. I think this one is a quite interesting one, because jargon for me falls in the same category as business speak and buzzwords. And I always say avoid them as much as you can because they're so overused and they really just lost the meaning at this point. So stay away from them. I think slang can be quite interesting, but this is also a fine line you have to be walking. If you want to say, I'm gonna play basketball today, that's fine. But if you're using a bit more of a harsher slang, you want to be careful without being offensive to certain groups or to your target audience. Now let's talk about humor and sensory language. I personally use cuss words when I write. I have no problem saying damn or stuff like that. I might have to be a bit careful with the F word, but it could work for your brand. If it comes to like Barack Obama, right? When somebody wrote his copy, they used cuss words in it because it worked with him, right? But you have to also be very careful where you're going with it and how far you're pushing this line. When it comes to humor, this is something I really want to emphasize. Certain brands want to be funny, right? They want to have this great sense of humor. And sometimes they really overdo it because they try to make every single message they send funny. You don't have to do that. You can crack a joke every now and then, and that's going to be more than enough. Because if you're doing it too much, it can just become very irritating to people who are reading it. So I said, really just balancing things out. Then personalization, we talked a little bit about this earlier, which is really about how you're referring to your customers, okay? And my favorite, do's and don'ts. We talked a little bit about being detailed, and I'll just give you one example for how I do style guides when I create them. So this is what it looks like in practice. If I want to be more on a conversational and casual side, right? So I say use conversational verbs, give, help, tell, need, want, and make, but avoid, provide, assist, and inform. This is quite specific. So when you're writing your messages, you can always go back to do's and don'ts and know which one you should use, which one you should avoid. I'll just give you one example, but you can definitely do this for every single part of your style guide. Okay, I hope you're following so far, and I'm not going too fast still. I tend to talk a little bit fast when I get excited about a good topic. So, and most importantly, try to implement your consistent tone of voice across all channels. It can be Instagram, it can be Facebook, it can be newsletters, it can be LinkedIn, it can be text messages if you're sending it to your customers, it can be chatbots, right? Anything that it is that you are using your tone of voice, it has to be consistent, because the last thing you want to have is somebody interacts with your brand at the first time. It's very conversational, it's very polite, they're enjoying it. They go to a different platform and they run into this cold, informal messaging. And what's going to happen is that you're going to create confusion, right? And that's the last thing you want when it comes to this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about brands that stand out. I'm going to ask you guys to help me here and think of your favorite brand that stands out for you. So feel free, please, to pop it in a chat box or give us some of your favorite brands.
It's actually really interesting because you mentioned Nike.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was thinking about making an introduction, and I was going to say, it's not only Nike and McDonald's that, have the marketing budgets to have a brand.
Yeah.
And those are pretty much the only two brands you mentioned. So that's very, I would say that's telling.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because I analyzed actually 3 brands, two that everybody knows, and third one that it's not that famous. And it really shows that you can do a lot of things, with not a lot of money if you get it right. We have
another
Coca-Cola.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
One of my favorites, although it does have a big budget as well, is Apple. Just I love the cleanliness of it, or how clean the brand is, and simple and elegant. So
yeah,
that's one for sure.
One of my favorite ones is actually called People Tree. It's a British brand. They're actually a startup and they're focused on sustainable clothing. But what I really love about them, because they have great copywriting, but what they really do is when they send you clothes, they have a little tag that has messages on it. So they make it really personal and they connect. Like, it's not only just about you receiving clothing, but it's about you making a difference when it comes to, fast fashion and stuff like that. So they're one of the examples that don't have a lot of money for budgets, but they're really doing well. Okay, we had one example here for Coca-Cola. Yes, everybody thinks of Coca-Cola, right? Especially in the winter time, Santa and everything else. Yes, they definitely have very distinctive messaging. Okay, guys, so let me walk you through 3 examples that I picked. Just my personal favorites. It's really not, make it or break it here, but what's interesting here is that I'm going to show you how everything we talked about until now is going to be reflected with these brands. Okay, so let's talk about Slack. I'm guessing at least a couple of you guys are using it for work, right? So when it comes to their tone of voice, they transmitted their tone of voice across every single channel, but they also implemented this in their tagline, their mission, and their vision. And this is something that I didn't talk about a lot because it's connected more to branding than just tone of voice. But when you define your tone of voice, make sure it also reflects in your mission, vision, and tagline. Right, so let's talk about Slack. They talk about being less busy. So really as a brand, they own this value of simplicity, of being really clear in what they're doing, making your life simpler, right? And their tone of voice is easy to understand, very clear, and it's friendly. And they're really doing well because they're friendly, but they're not crossing that line of trying to be your best friend, right? They're just keeping it as friendly at work, but not doing too much. And they did actually a fantastic job because they changed their logo, I think last year, and they just sent a very simple message like, hey guys, they didn't go, look at me, I have a brand new logo, you should admire me now. They said, hey, we changed it. These are a couple of really basic reasons. We thought it would look better. Here it is, done, right? So they're being very simple and clean in their messaging. And this actually quote, clear, concise, and human, is from their style guide. And they say, if you stick to those things, you can't go far wrong. Whatever you're trying to say, think about how you would explain it first. Don't leap into what words would my bot choose. You probably end up picking something bizarre, right? This is a great piece of advice when it comes to anything you're writing, because often in writing, people write something, then you read it and you think, what did they really want to say? And then you ask them, if you're talking to a real person, hey, what did you mean? And they explain a completely different language. So you just have to avoid this concept of explaining what you said, because if somebody has to read twice what you wrote, it's not clear enough. Okay, let's talk about a second one. Nike, one of my favorites, just for a simple reason, because I played professional basketball and I use their products a lot and I love watching their commercials. I'm not going to play this one now for you guys, but we can share the link later. When it comes to Nike, they have this concept of having their athletes as heroes, right? And they talk about treating every single person that buy their product as an athlete. As long as you have a body, you're an athlete. And their tone of voice is very powerful, very inspirational, very confident. And what's super interesting about them is that they don't focus that much on their products. You're never gonna read about Nike's shoes saying, oh, they have this much power and they're this long and this thick. They don't talk about product features. They talk about what this product can do for you. How does this product make you feel? And that's exactly what we talked about in the beginning. How is it when you read this copy, it makes you feel? It makes you want to click, buy those shoes and run a marathon, right? Because you get so excited and inspired to do this. And so yeah, I just posted one commercial there as an example, but they're really about diversity and inspiring everybody to do the best they can. And the third one that's actually not as famous, I believe it's an American brand, BarkBox. I don't know if you guys heard of it. I'm a huge dog lover, so if I lived in the US, I would definitely order it. Basically, their brand is focused on being quirky, right? But also really being close to dog lovers, right? A lot of us are, you have some fantastic, somebody says BarkBox is awesome. I'm assuming you're also a dog lover. But what is it about them? So basically their product is quite simple. They're selling toys for dogs and they're selling treats for dogs, right? Quite simple. You can just say, hey, feed your dog, here it is. But they make it so fun and interesting. Every month they have a theme with their boxes and they name it. So if you look at the right side here, it's great copywriting. It's fantastic. They use these references to dogs to create a theme every month. So you have snowbound hounds, right? It's time to play. They talk about Jurassic Bark, definitely a reference to dinosaurs, right? And every single sentence, they're short, they're sweet, but they're embodying this concept of quirkiness and being fun. And they're not crossing that line. They're just making you smile like, oh, I like that. That was a good pun. That was good. One of my favorite ones on the left side was here. Everybody heard assistant manager of some department, right? They call it assistant manager treats department. This is such a tiny little pun they're using that it works so well for them, right? So it's just about knowing your audience. And my favorite part about them, I'm definitely advertising them this time, but it's fine, is that when you order their product, they ask for your dog's name. They're not making it about you, they're making about a dog. So again, about a personalization and getting it right. So anyway, these were a couple of brands that I picked just because I thought they were quite
just add, oh, there we have.
Your dog is looking for a bark box.
Yeah, she gets excited when we talk about bots. I'm sorry. So you brought up a really interesting point there with Slack, where you had an excerpt from their style guide. So it's actually pretty easy to find, style guides of different brands online if you need them for reference.
Yes.
So that's like a pretty useful resource, I would say.
Yes, MailChimp is one of the best ones, I have to say. They have a full style guide. IKEA as well. They have a full style guide of what's their messaging, how are they doing it. So definitely feel free to take a look, because all these brands are very successful.
Take some inspiration.
Yes. I think it's very good to see how it's structured and how big brands are doing it. Okay, if you guys are okay so far, I'll try to speed up so I leave a bit more time for Angela as well. So let's talk a little bit about chatbots. I'm going to leave this to Angela, but I will just touch a little bit on it. So when we think about chatbots, what's the first thing you think about? How do they sound to you? What is the first reference?
I don't think we have like the right to say things.
You can't say it. Okay, fair enough. Somebody said robotic.
Yes.
Yeah. It's okay, fair enough, because we need to talk, I think we need to touch a little bit on this, because this is a great opportunity to differentiate and break some stigma and some concepts about this. So let me just move my chat box. Here it is. Okay, so when we talk about chatbots, for me, it's always a make it or break it moment, right? They have this first interaction. How is it going to go? Remember that first impression is really important, because you need to get it right. People maybe come with a problem that they want you to solve it. You don't want to irritate them. You don't want to make it worse. You need to get it right. And what's really important here is that average just isn't good enough. In today's market, you have to stand out and you have to be great at what you do. So with that being said, let's talk just a tiny little bit about the chatbot experience. You really need to create this amazing customer experience when it comes to chatbots. Of course, sometimes it can be automated messages, and that's a bit, more into a different side of what I'm talking about. But if it's, no matter what, it needs to be interesting for them. It needs to be memorable. And when it comes to chatbots, it's really not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it, right? I'll give you one example. We talked about Nike earlier. Their tagline is just do it, right? If we rephrase it, just do it into more formal language, we would say, ensure action is taken, right? It means the same thing, but just written differently. And nobody feels inspired by hearing ensure action is taken, right? So this is just a prime example that it's not really what you say, it's how you're saying it. And the last but not the least here definitely is that when you have your style guide for brand tone of voice, you need to make sure that your chatbot voice is matching that brand tone of voice. It's so important, because if people are going to interact with your brand at one point, they don't want to run into something that's called robotic or anything else, right? So just make sure this is definitely aligned. So last question, do you think the chatbot should be fun or functional? My opinion is that you should put fun in functional, but always remember it's only the first part, right? So make it memorable, but make sure that it's also working for your customer. And I'm not going to talk about chatbots anymore at all, I promise. So just a few key takeaways from everything that I talked about today. Really make sure you're creating a connection and not a confusion. So we talked about aligning really your brand values, your culture, your brand personality, and the tone of voice. This all needs to be part of this coherent system that works. Everything needs to be aligned if you want to be a successful brand. So when you're having a successful brand and you have all this aligned, what you're really doing is you're creating an unforgettable experience. And if you're creating an unforgettable experience, you're building trust with your customers. And by building trust, you're building loyalty. They want to be part of the cool kids club, okay? They want to interact with your brand one more time. And ultimately, really, if you're having trust, you're having loyalty, they're liking what you're doing, you're growing your business and really making money. That's what ultimately brands are trying to do. So really my piece of advice here is to be unique and authentic. You can see what other people are doing, but make sure that you're being true to yourself, and that you're really doing what works for your brand. And definitely last but not least, is being consistent. It's so important to be consistent across every type of communication that you have. I already gave you this example earlier. You don't want somebody to interact with your brand and say, oh, I'm loving it, they were so much fun, and they interact the second time and they go, oh, wow, well, that was disappointing, because you weren't consistent. So you just constantly want to have this excitement about your brand. No matter what the product you're selling, it really doesn't matter. You can always be consistent and be exciting. As I said, what works for your brand. So that's all I had when it comes to brand tone of voice. I hope this was specific enough for you guys. So, and I covered as much as I could in a short period of time.
I have to say I'm impressed. I mean, the first time we talked, I said, oh, this is such a wide topic. I don't know how we're going to put it, you know, in such a small time frame, but I think you actually managed to do it. One thing that I'm actually really interested in, if we could like briefly touch on it before we give Angela enough time to tell us a bit more about how to do this specifically with your chatbot. How long do you think, like according to your experience, how long does it take to create a good style guide?
How long is the piece of string, right? I guess in this case, it just depends on how much time you're committing. I think you can easily do it in a week or two. I don't think it's going to take, you know, months or years, but you have to have a strong base. You have to have your values aligned, your personality aligned. You have to know your audience, and you have to know your competitors. If you have this right, style guide can be created in a couple of days. So as I said, just depends on how much work you have to get done to get to the style guide, because that's kind of almost like the last stop before launching everything, right? So as I said, just depends on how much work you have done so far.
All right. Well, Leana, thank you so much for sharing all your insights. And
You're
speaking of consistency, which you just mentioned on the last slide there, we'll now give Angela the stage and pass the mic to her. And she'll, as Yelena mentioned, talk about how to kind of apply these principles of, you know, copywriting and brand voice to Chatfuel, to Messenger, to your chatbot, or virtual assistant, to say it another way that's less robotic, as we mentioned earlier. So Angela, take it away.
All right. Yes, so I am the copywriter and editor here at Chatfuel, which means that much of my, if not most of my day-to-day job revolves around brand voice and making sure that Chatfuel's brand voice is consistent across all the channels that we're on. And that of course includes Messenger. So I think that Leana set it up really nice for me. It's amazing that we created these presentations separately, but they like interlock so nicely. Like as I was listening, I was like, yes, I'm going to build off that point. This is perfect. So basically what I've done is I created a little checklist for any bot builder, any marketer who's using chatbots to go through. And basically what I want you to do is look at your chatbot's content with a critical eye, and then ask yourself these 7 questions that I'm going to pull up here in a second. If the answer to the question is yes, that means that, okay, you've done a good job translating this aspect of your brand voice into your bot. If the answer is no, it means there's a little room for improvement and kind of fine tuning that and making it really consistent from between your bot and your website and your social media and all these other channels that you're on. So the PDF of this checklist will be available after for you guys to use. I'm just gonna
and Angela won't be grading you. It will be like a self-assessment, so don't worry. It's okay.
Exactly. Okay, I'm gonna zoom in here. Can you guys see this?
Yep, looks great.
Looks good. Okay, perfect. So let's dive right in. So as I said, take a look at your chatbot's content and ask yourself these questions about it. So question 1 is, does your content sound the same as your website content and your social media content? So as Leana mentioned, when they go from your website and then they're in your bot, are they going to be like, wait, I thought I was talking to this brand and now it sounds like I'm talking to a completely different brand. You want to aim to use the same kind of language across all your channels. So for example, let's say you sell like comfy clothes and loungewear, which if you do, you're probably doing pretty well right now when everyone's home in their comfy clothes. But if your website says like experience luxury loungewear at home, but then people go to your bot and your bot's like, hey, want to buy the best sweatpants in the world? It doesn't, there's a disconnect there. It clashes. It doesn't sound the same. So you want to make it sound like all your copy was written by one person, even though obviously that's usually not the case. You really want to aim for that consistency in your bot. The second question to ask yourself about your bot's content is, does it match your brand style guide? Which now we all have a pretty good handle on exactly what a style guide is. So if you already have a great style guide, just go ahead and do an audit and make sure that matches up. Your bot content matches up with that. But if you don't have a style guide, I have just a quick recommendation about how to still achieve some of that brand consistency in your bot, which is go through some of the keywords that you use when you talk about your brand, your products, your industry, and decide how you're going to talk about them and then stick to that. So for example, if you're an apparel store, decide whether you're going to refer to the shirts you sell as gray t-shirts, G-R-A-Y, or gray tees, G-R-E-Y, tees versus t-shirts. Like there's a lot of different ways you could say that. So picking one and referring to it the same way every time is really going to help people understand that, you know what you're talking about and that you can be consistent. Like for Chatfuel, for example, we never say chat space bot. It's always chatbot. We always capitalize the M in messenger, things like that. These little stylistic elements really impact the subconscious of your readers, and they'll notice those things even if it's not consciously. So if you don't have a brand style guide, just make a quick little list of these terms you use most and then pick one way to write them and stick with that throughout. Another point that Leana touched on a bit, which is really pertinent for Messenger, is obviously GIFs and emoji. Both are really common in Messenger. I wouldn't say to shy away from them. Like most brands can use them. It's just the ones that you pick need to match your style. So here's the test, which this is really funny because Leana mentioned this exactly. Think of 3 adjectives that describe your brand's personality, and then make sure the GIFs and emoji that you use match that. So let's say you sell like luxurious, really nice like wristwatches. You might describe your brand as luxurious, high-end, sophisticated, words like that. So if you're looking at your bot's content and you realize you used a GIF of like a dancing panda or like a Real Housewife where she like spits out her wine or something like really dramatic, that doesn't match your brand voice at all. So you can still use a GIF, but maybe in a scenario like that where you're a little more formal, a GIF would be something that you make and it's like showing your watch from a few different angles. So you can still get that movement in the conversation. You can still get that visual element that draws the eye, but it's on brand for you. And same with emoji. You don't have to use like peace sign and ghost and like crying cat, laughing cat, all of these like kind of more quirky emoji if that doesn't fit your brand. You can still use like the arrows and some of the more basic emoji to still draw the eye and show people, you know, what to click on next and where you want them to go, and have those emojis still be on brand.
Angela, since you're a GIF person, I don't know if we can be friends after this, but like we can, you know, discuss it later.
I know it's tough. Save all those funny GIFs that you wanted to use but don't fit your brand and send them to me in Slack. I'll appreciate them. Okay, the next question to ask yourself about your content, these next 2 are more about adapting your brand's voice to the Messenger platform, because it's kind of a unique place. So the question is, does your bot's content fit this concise and casual style of Facebook Messenger? So let's go back to the example of like the luxury wristwatch brand. If your website has like these long, you know, stories that you paint a picture with your words, you're like, you're sitting in a beautiful field and you see a glint and it's your wristwatch and it's beautiful, like that type of content, you can still adapt that voice to Messenger, but you don't want content that's quite that long and verbose, and you're going to need to trim it down to fit Messenger a little bit while keeping to your brand voice. So really make sure you're sending content in digestible chunks. And one tip I have for you, if you're not sure if your content's concise enough and like kind of, you know, casual enough as far as, you know, this back and forth exchange on this platform where people are used to talking to family and friends, I recommend using a readability tool like this one I've listed here. You just paste in your content and it'll spit out a grade for you. So if you get an A or a B, you know you're doing pretty well. Your content is pretty concise and gets to the point, which is good. If you score lower, then you need to maybe consider shortening some of your sentences, using simpler words instead of long. Like one I see all the time is people love to use the phrase "in order to" instead of just "for." Like, we provide software solutions in order to grow your, no, we provide software solutions to grow your business. Like, that's an example of, you know, how you could really shorten something up and make it more clear and concise for the Messenger platform.
Angela, can I jump in here just for a
Yes,
second?
please
Because
do.
I use the readability tool quite a lot in a lot of
love it.
things. You also have it in Word as well, which I don't know if a lot of people know or not, but when you run your spell check, you can actually tick the box for proofing to show you the readability score as well. So once they check all the grammar, they will give you the reading score. And then, of course, depending on a brand, but you're sometimes aiming between 55 and 65 for good readability. And Angela already explained what kind of goes into that readability as well. Anyway, I just want to chip in because a lot of people use Word for writing as well. So that's
I did not know they had a native tool for that. So that's really awesome.
Oh, fantastic.
And yeah, readability scores differ. There's tons of them. Sometimes in some scoring, like a 10 is terrible, and other scoring, a 10 is like what you want to aim for. So definitely like check the scale first and see, you know, what kind of numbers you're looking for. But yeah, using readability wherever you're writing your content, using readability tools wherever you're writing your content is smart. So just a couple more questions here. The next one is, does your bot's content fit that conversational style of Messenger? So you got to remember that Messenger is a dialogue. It's a back and forth. It's not just your brand, like, you know, forcing content upon users. It's, you really want to get that engagement and that dialogue there. So a tip for doing this in practice is imagine that your bot is like a human ambassador for your brand, and they're in your showroom or your store at a trade show, and they're talking to customers. If you're like, you know, kind of watching this interaction, how would you want them to, you know, be chatting with a prospect or a customer? You probably want them to give a warm, friendly greeting, ask lots of engaging questions that are insightful, and get at, you know, what the customer really needs. Because if you looked over there and you saw that they're just droning on and on about your product and not even asking the customer why they're here or what they're looking for, that's not really going to be an effective interaction. So if it helps you, maybe think about your bot as if it were a human, and how you could make it a really good conversationalist while keeping to your brand voice, but not like monologuing. All right, almost there, just 2 more points. The next one is an easy one to understand, but a hard one to implement. Proper grammar and spelling. It's something that's near and dear to my heart. So my analogy for this is, if someone invited you to a party and they were like, oh, don't worry, the dress code's casual, you wouldn't show up barefoot and like with stains on your shirt, because that's sloppy. That's not the same as casual. Casual still means put together, just like a little more laid back. So don't confuse the two. No matter what your brand voice is, it's important to use proper grammar and spelling, unless there are a few brands I know where it's their thing to misspell words and be like, that's like part of their voice, but that's a pretty rare case. So, and even in that case, they do it really intentionally and consistently. So for most of us, just use spell check, have someone proofread your copy. Poor grammar and mistakes like that damage your credibility on any channel, including Messenger. So definitely watch out for that. And the last one is another point that Leana kind of touched on. And it's interesting she brought up the BarkBox example, because that's kind of the example I had in my mind too. Note, not all bots have a persona or need a persona, but some do. Some say like, hey, how you doing today? My name is Blake and I'm a chatbot that's here to help you. So if you do go that route and have a persona for your bot, again, just make sure it matches your brand voice. So if BarkBox, you know, if you went into the bot for BarkBox, kind of a tongue twister, you would expect it to be like, hey, let's get an awesome toy for your, you know, for your dog. And it would have a cute name like Fido or like Spot or something. It wouldn't be like, hello, my name is Jeeves and I'm here to direct your questions. Like it has to match. So if you make a persona, make sure that it makes sense with your brand. So that's the checklist. As I said, you guys will have access to this after, so you can kind of go through and do like an audit of your bot's content to make sure that you've translated your brand voice to Messenger, so you can build that brand credibility and that trust and grow your business as a result. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer that. I think I saw the chat light up a little bit.
There are no questions. There's just praise.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we have Alexander who says he's super excited to get the brand voice audit checklist. So
Awesome.
good stuff.
Sweet.
Any other questions from any of you?
I don't have a question. I would just like, after seeing all of this, like, you know, when you hear people say they don't have the time or the brand is not like the main thing they can focus on right now. And what these ladies talked about tonight is the core of your business, knowing your users, knowing your competition, knowing yourself. So I really think that this is like so important for everyone to focus on, you know, even if you're gonna have someone help you create your brand voice and then be able to, you know, follow through with it on your own. So yeah, definitely if you're watching today, okay, it's night here, so it's tonight. If you're with us today and if this was like what you needed to make that step and to actually finally be brave enough to start building your brand, it's not that difficult. There are all these resources out there and it can be so valuable for your business. And I'm also going to pop Leana's website here. I also already posted it on YouTube. So if you want to keep talking to her about any of this stuff. Yeah.
Yelena, I just want to jump in here when you talked about that this is like the core of your business.
Yep.
I think it's so important that people need to look at investing their time and money into getting it right, because once you get it right, this is not like something you need to constantly reinvent. Right. So this is a smart investment. Once you get it right, once you analyze everything, once you have things defined, you're good to go. So really, this is an investment in your business. It's not, oh, I don't have time, or, you know, branding is a bit difficult for me. It's, if you can't do it yourself, you can always find people who can help you and who are willing to help you. It might not be necessarily doing it for you, but it will give you great advices or some resources. So I think it's really, you know, finding a way or making one if this is something you really want to focus on.
Yeah,
Totally.
definitely.
And to build on that too, before we close, you know, in the abstract, it might seem like, oh, you know, my bots, brand voice and copy and all that, like it seems abstract, like maybe it's something that I don't want to, you know, do or put off, like we said. But I remember just a couple of weeks ago, we did this chatbot contest in our community, and one of the winners was this like adventure story. So it wasn't really a business use case, granted, but basically like the copywriting in it and the voice was just so effective and, you know, engaging that I just kept like going through to the next thing. So I think it's a testament of, you know, how important voice really is. It can, as you mentioned earlier, really make or break the experience. So thank you, Leana, for presenting and sharing all this great information. Thanks to Angela and Yelena as well. We'll share all of the resources and slides presented if you haven't already gotten them. And yeah, keep perfecting your brand voice and building great bots. Thanks so much.